Welcome to the SWIKE podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The SWIKE podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the SWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier podcast. We're joined with our guest host, Paulson, who was one of the co-authors for the book Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the Young Professionals edition. And we thought we'd have a conversation on personal finance. So, Paulson, how are you doing today?
Yeah, doing great. Thanks for having me back, Luki.
Not a problem. Always a pleasure. So I've been having a lot of conversation with folks with the release of the book at the young professional level. So recently graduated, started a job and eager and raring to go, starting their life out after school, that sort of thing. But oftentimes the conversation of personal finance comes out, where they talk about like savings and budgeting and RSPs, TFSAs, and what should they invest in, and then other things of that nature. So I thought we'd grab one of our experts to have a bit of a conversation on things folks should consider. And obviously, this is just a conversation between us. So for those that are listening, for whatever your personal needs, consult your own financial advisor and finance professional for your particular needs. But hopefully, we'll give you some thoughts and insights in terms of things that you should start asking about or looking into as part of that. So I thought we'd start the conversation with a little bit on kind of salary and benefits, right? So you just landed a job, you hopefully it was the one that you wanted, and you're doing whatever you're doing, you're getting a paycheck every 2 weeks or every month, whatever it is, and so you have benefits as well. So I think just as we were talking off the air, there's the base compensation, which is your salary coming in, and then another aspect that people often put aside. So the benefits side of that. So what are your kind of guidance, advice on doing the most with their salary and their benefits and things like that as they start their career path?
Yeah, for sure, and it's definitely an important topic, right? And I think for a lot of people, sometimes we definitely forget, especially when you're starting out your career, the importance and of some of these benefits, right? Mm-hmm. When Luki asked me to talk about this subject and just have this conversation, I actually just took a quick look on Google and what I found was that companies actually budget for 15, like large companies, I should say, budget for almost 15 to 30% of their payroll on benefits, mm-hmm. right? And you can almost think of that as a 15 to 30% bonus on top of your salary, right? Mm-hmm. In a sense, right? Put differently. So I think what it entails is really that things like, getting dental, right? Or a new mm-hmm. pair of glasses every year, right? Flex dollars, other health benefits, insurance, right? Disability, critical illness, life insurance, all of those things put together, right? They're worth money. There's mm-hmm. money out of the pocket, right? And often when you're young, starting out, sometimes there are things that you don't think about, and there are things that you might say, hey, yeah, this might be nice when I'm further on in my life. But I've it's especially through COVID, it's become just for me anyways really apparent that some of these things can really come into use earlier. Right. And more you're seeing people, talking about things like even mental wellness and all of these type of subjects. Right. So personal care, don't underestimate it. And it's definitely can be a pretty significant portion and just factor that into the overall compensation package as well.
For sure. So what that amounts to is you have your paycheck coming in, but you also have this other thing, which may be a untapped resource, so your benefits. So even though it may be complicated, may be hard to understand, take a moment mm-hmm. to read through it and see what's actually available. So you mentioned a bunch of things like maybe flex dollars or dental or massage and things like that. So what is covered and available? And to your point about the 15%, I mean, those are for larger companies. Smaller companies might only do like 1 or 2%, but hey, we could all use a 1 or 2% pay increase as well. I've also seen that sometimes they allow you to take those money. So if you don't have braces or don't need eyeglasses or whatever, you could put it into, let's say, an RSP or something like that, right? And they can kind of put that in or match. I've also seen companies that do kind of bonuses for things like certifications. So if you get for your particular area, for me, it used to be like a project management professional, a PMP. The company actually gave me a bonus for that, right? I've seen other companies that actually give a little bit of incentive for volunteering, right? So they'll give like $100 to the charity of your choice under your name, that sort of thing. And there's a whole bunch of other things that are not necessarily that are paid for by the company that a lot of people don't take advantage of. And there are also like the group buy programs, like the Percopolises and what have you, where you can save at certain retailers and things like that. So make sure that you take a look at some of those things, right?
For sure. Yeah. And I'll just add one thing, and Luki, you touched on it, which is just so important. That definitions matter in these things, right? So in the booklet, right, what it actually describes, the level of detail to which things are described, that's what's included in your package, and that's what your employer is paying for, right, on your behalf, right? And then there are things that you might want to look at too, like if for folks that are thinking about getting their personal or private plans like on the side, you really want to couple that with what's available through work as well, right? Understanding that what is made available through your employer would have a really specific definition, and there are other things that you may want to complement it with as well.
For sure. Yeah. So the homework for folks is to take a look at your benefits, at everything that's encompassed in there. Oftentimes there's an employee portal that will have some of that in there, well, depending on the size of the company. So explore and be curious and spend your weekend or afternoon or whatever to kind of perusing to make sure that you're capitalizing on everything that's there. And then what you'll want to do is hopefully set up a spending plan. Some people call it a budget, right? To know now that you're having money coming in, it's not an inexhaustible source, right? It comes in, but expenses come out. So you want to make sure, well, how much do you make? Do you actually know? Because there's things like taxes. Sometimes they have like union dues and other fees and stuff like that. So your base salary is not necessarily what gets deposited into your bank account on a regular basis. Yeah. So knowing that amount. And then you want to think about things like savings, right? So taking some of that income and saving, and then obviously addressing all the expenses. So for some of the young professionals, they might still be living at home. So that's a huge burden that's off because they don't have rent or a mortgage to pay for, so they have a little bit more flexibility. But for those that are off on their own, well, they have a lot of other things that they have to consider as well. So making sure that you know how much you are truly making versus kind of that annualized salary. You want to know how much is actually deposited in your bank account on a regular basis, and then how much your expenses are. What are kind of your thoughts and guidelines around kind of spending plans and budgets and for people to really understand how much is coming in and how much is going out?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think especially today when everywhere you go, you see inflation being like that number one thing like that the economy is facing today. But I think that and the other factor being that cities like big cities in Canada are getting increasingly expensive to live in, right? I know that Luki and I live in Toronto, and the cost of living is just going through the roof, right? So yeah, it's a hot topic, and there is no perfect answer, I think, and you want to give yourself a bit of grace. I think that's the first thing when it comes to this stuff. But I like to think of it as splitting things into different buckets, right? And on a high level, there's usually a essential bucket that people have to plan for, right? This could be rent, it could be food, it could be maybe for some people going to the gym, right? Like that's essential to them, right? And I think a lot of times these are planned expenses. They're expenses that don't change month to month, right? Your cell phone bill, that's until it expires, it's basically it's an expense you can plan for, right? And then there's a non-essential bucket. You can think of it as more of a variable type of changing. This could be going to the movies. This could be planning that weekend trip to the Muskokas. It could be any of those items, right? Shopping, whatever it is, Amazon. and I think when you look at things, right, once you have a grasp of your spending patterns in terms of essential, non-essential, and you really want to look at the savings bucket as well, and almost treat that as a essential item, essential expense, right? And I think this was one of the concepts that we talked about in our book together, which was that when it comes to savings, the real power of it is if you do it consistently, if you do it with every paycheck and you treat it just like every other expense, right? And I think it doesn't have to start off, big, right? And it's something that you can certainly plan for and grow as you grow comfortable with what you're spending. But essentially, you're really balancing that act between your paying yourself first versus non-essential items, and trying to figure out in between what that line looks like based on your salary, based on your compensation, and based on where you live and what you need to spend, right?
For sure. I think the crux of it is just making sure that there's more money coming in than there is going out. That's kind of the fundamental basics of it. And once you have that, then taking a look at the money going out and thinking about things like essentials. Like, so those are the non-negotiable things that you have to have. And that there are going to be different things for different people, because as you said, like the gym might be an essential for some people. Others, it's a non-essential, right? I think that the point about savings as an essential item is definitely helpful. And we'll talk a little bit more about essentials, about savings later. And then you want to plan for those non-essentials as well. Like you want to go out for dinner and with the boys, with the girls, with whomever, on the weekends and this and that. And then I think you should also look to plan for emergencies, right? Those once-off, like speeding tickets, breakdowns in the car, or like any appliances or this and that or whatever. Cell phone needs to be replaced, and cracked screens and all that sort of stuff. And I think the guidance is something from like 3 to 6 months worth of expenses is kind of the guidelines. And making sure that you have that. And again, it starts probably at 0 and then adding like 1% to it, to 10% to it, to whatever you could manage on a regular basis, but doing it consistently and early can be very helpful. So, and this is a process where you don't have to do it all at once, right? You can start thinking about, okay, do I have more money coming in than going out? Okay, great. Now, next week, you want to say, okay, how do I start allocating like the savings amount? How do I start building this emergency fund? How do I start planning for that vacation next year overseas or wherever it is, and start building on that? Are there any other points that you want to add on that?
Yeah, like a tip I would just bring up is that a lot of times when you keep things in one account, all of these things merge together. It's really easy to mix in your vacation fund with what you're doing this weekend, right? For example, and I think just as a good practice, like having different accounts set up, whether it's savings accounts or accounts outside of your general spending account, it just makes things a little bit more difficult for you to have to access those funds, right? And sometimes those still the small barriers are what it takes to really, all it takes sometimes to really make sure that you get to stay disciplined and stick to what you have planned, right? So I'd encourage you, just take a look at that and figure out how to actually set up structures and systems in place to make it a little bit more difficult for yourself, and at the same time allow you to keep to your planned budget or spending plan.
Yeah, and in this day and age, it's not necessarily that much more difficult to set them up, right? To have like kind of the normal bank account, and then the one of those online brokerage or whatever accounts, and then an automatic savings plan that takes out whatever $100 a paycheck, $1,000 a paycheck, whatever you can manage, and then in order for you to get that back into your account, it usually takes some time, 3 to 5 business days or whatever. And by that time, hopefully the urge to spend is gone, and you're able to kind of save some money. But sometimes if you really want to, and that's something that you that becomes an essential or something that you really want, then at least you've thought through and planned on that. Sure. So the topic often comes up with savings. So we briefly touched upon that, and a lot of folks is like, you know what, I have some money set aside and I can put somewhere. So the initial discussion is things like RSP or TFSA. So maybe kind of defining some of those terms, and obviously this is for a Canadian audience, but in other countries they have similar products. But if you were to kind of have folks think about whether to put something in an RSP or TFSA, what would be your thoughts and guidance around that?
Yeah. So there's no right answer, and a lot of it is understanding your situation and what your plan is, per se, and what you intend to do with the money, right? But on a high level, like, and definitely, as we mentioned at the early, when we started the podcast, seek out advice, and if you need it, and especially when it comes to this area. So the way that these two account structures work is the TFSA generally is a account. It's pretty easy to understand. Money that goes in is after tax dollars, right? You've already paid tax on those dollars. You put it into account called a TFSA, right?
And short for tax-free savings account, right?
Tax-free savings account, which is a bit of a misnomer because it's not really just a savings account. It can be a savings account, but you can actually buy different types of securities inside. We'll talk about that after. But essentially how it works is that everything you put into it, it grows. If you make money, it grows tax-free. If you lose money, you also don't get any, you can't claim expenses on that. But the whole idea of it is that money inside enjoys tax-free growth. And when you take money out of the TFSA, you also pay no taxes. Right? That's how the account is set up. The RRSP, on the other hand, is a little bit different. So it's really a mechanism to control. It's an account structure that's in place to really control your income tax, right? That's really what it's for.
It's the registered retirement savings plan for those that like what definitions are. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks, Luki. So it's the way that it works is that money you put into it actually acts as a income deduction, right? You're really lowering your taxable income by putting money into the RSP by the same amount that you put into the RSP. And if you think about it, right, when we were talking about your salary and benefits earlier, a lot of times when you're getting your paycheck, those taxes that you need to pay are already deducted from your paycheck, right? They're deducted off each and every one of your paychecks. And what ends up happening is that when your taxable income is lowered, the CRA or the government now owes you money, right? And they give it back to you in the form of a refund, right? Because you prepaid those taxes, they're now giving it back to you because your taxable income has dropped, and it's now in this account structure called the RRSP, right? The catch is that when you take money out of the RSP, it's also treated as income, right? It's also added to your tax bracket. And the whole idea of the RSP is that ideally it's really meant for retirement when you don't have a salary anymore, or years, you could say years where you don't have a salary, right? That where if you need to take money out of the structure, that you are in a lower tax bracket, hopefully at that time. And that money you take out, you get to keep more of it just because you're in the lower tax bracket, right? So that's how it works. In the case of the RSP, any growth is tax. You don't pay tax on while the money is growing inside. There's a compounding effect that can happen in that sense. But when you're taking money out of the account, it is 100% taxable income. So that's the difference between the two, right? In terms of which one you go with, a lot of it depends on your plan and what those funds that go into the account, what it's really meant for, right? For example, if it's money that you might need in a few years, right? And you're anticipating, hey, I might need to pull this out in a couple of years to buy a home, right? The RSP, if it's your first home, the RSP has something called a first-time home buyer's plan that you can borrow from, and we can touch on that in a second. But for the most part, you don't want to lock up your money into a RSP when it's meant, if you need access to those funds while you're still anticipating that you're going to work, right? Because money that you take out, yes, you're getting that, you're lowering your taxable income by putting money into the RSP, but at the same time, right, when you take it out, it's added to your income again, right? So you don't necessarily want to restrict yourself if you feel like you need access to these funds and you kind of want to plan accordingly. And in those cases, the TFSA might be a better structure to go with, right? If saving taxes is your number one priority and this is for long-term money, then yeah, RSPs are generally going to be the best account to go with for most Canadians, especially as your income goes up and you move up the tax bracket in terms of compensation. So yeah, those are some things to consider. Obviously, it doesn't cover everything, but I'd say that you'd really want to map that out and seek out some professional advice, ideally, to make sure that your goals are in line with how you're structuring things. And every year does matter when it comes to these accounts, just because we are allocated a certain amount of space every year, and you want to plan accordingly with that.
Yeah. So what I took from that is with anything, just start, right? Regardless of what you do, put it in one of the two. I think the guidance that I've heard is when you're young and starting out, you probably want to put it more to the TFSA, right? Because you're not making a ton of money, so that taxes, you're probably not in the highest tax bracket at that point, right? Well, although some of you who are kind of high achieving professionals and you started off there, maybe you're there. But for the most kind of young professional, recent grad type of thing, you're probably in a slightly lower tax bracket. So you're probably going to be a little bit better off putting stuff in your TFSA, and then once it's maxed out, then put into your RSP, and then once those are maxed out, then you can put it into kind of general savings, and hopefully you get to that point. And that doesn't mean you have to, right? So everyone's in their own unique situation where you might not be able to max out any of those two. But the goal is to try to put in as much as you can, because to your point about like the compounding effect, it helps. So when you're starting at 22 versus 32 versus 42, there's all sorts of different calculators where like you could like double your savings each time, that sort of thing, each decade that you're early, or that sort of thing, right? So you want to make sure that you're capitalizing on that. And I've heard folks discussing, and not so much recently, but before, things like the FIRE movement. Have you heard of that? Like the financial independence, retire early. Any thoughts or comments on that kind of way of living your life and spending your money and saving?
Yeah, it's I mean, everyone wants to. A lot of people want to retire early, right? I think that's clear. It's a lot of it comes down to what your priority is, right, and the type of life you want to live. And some of this goes back to the conversation we were having earlier about that spending plan and what that looks like for you, right? And no one can really dictate, the type of life that you want to live. So yeah, I've seen folks planning. I have a client of mine is planning to retire in his early 40s, right? And he's normal person and wants to not making incredible salaries, but they're making the necessary I guess sacrifices on a daily basis, like on a annual basis, to make sure that they can reach their goals to do that, right? So I think it's definitely if that is what your passion is, and to live financially free, then plan for it and put a budget in place, put a spending pattern, savings plan in place, and then and execute well.
Yeah, I know when my parents were growing up that there was the saying, a penny saved is a penny earned, right? So they were very focused more on the expenses versus the income. Seems that nowadays more people are focused on the income, just making $1 bajillion on an annual salary versus looking at the expenses. Because, well, if you have, let's call it a high price Starbucks coffee versus a more cost effective Timmy's coffee, right? It depends if you're a coffee connoisseur or not. But if all you need is a little bit of caffeine, then saving $2-3 on a daily basis can add up over time, and those little sacrifices, quote unquote, might be useful to help you kind of retire in your 50s, 40s, or whatever it is that you want to, or I mean, you can choose to enjoy life a little bit more. So it all depends, as you said, on your priorities.
100%. Yeah. And on that, I'll add a phrase, because it's just struck me, as the similarities just struck me, which is when I first started my career, I there was a saying that $1 you save through tax planning is $1 you don't have to chase after in returns, right? Investment returns. And said similarly, like in the same way, like as your income goes up, taxes become a bigger and bigger part of that equation. And for a lot of Canadians, it can become almost the biggest expense, right? In a sense, right? So yeah, plan for it. And there are ways to look into that deeper and to make sure that you can mitigate and save on taxes. And if you plan accordingly, that also compounds to something more. So yeah, just wanted to point that out as well.
For sure. We might get into a more deeper dive episode when we write the experienced professionals edition and get in when you're in that tax area. But I wanted to touch a little bit about things like assets and the investments that you actually put this money into. So as you mentioned before, like the misnomer of the tax-free savings account, it's not really a savings account. You can actually put it in other things like stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and things like that, right? And other assets to help it grow, right? And same with RSP, right? There are different vehicles. It's just on how the account is, I guess, labeled for all intents and purposes. But you have kind of the typical. So you have like stocks, you have bonds, you have mutual funds, and things like that. And then a lot of folks are actually starting to look into real estate. So I know a lot of young folks that are looking to buy an investment property to either flip or a rental property. Some of them are actually looking to buy businesses where there could be like an online Amazon dropship type business where they can sell things on the side or whatever. Some of them are looking into physical assets, right? Where they're collectors and they believe that this particular baseball or Pokemon card is going to go up in value over time, that sort of thing. And then there's like things like NFT and crypto, which are kind of on the fringes a little bit, but those are often weaved into the conversation of different kind of investment vehicles and things like that. So what are your thoughts on any and or all those?
Yeah, so it's exciting times and love it. I love those conversations, and it definitely is exciting to hear about what everyone is getting up to. And I'd say, like, with all assets, right, and or securities, whatever you want to call them, right, just understand that it follows the rules of supply and demand, right, and that there has to be people that want to buy your asset for it to be worth something, right? If no one wants to buy it, it's not worth anything, right? So all assets follow that rule, right? When there's marketplace, there's an exchange of goods, right? It just understand that that's the mechanism behind everything. And like all marketplaces, things don't always just go up, right? There are times when things can go sideways or down as well, right? We're seeing it right now in certain assets, actually a lot of different types of assets at this moment across the board. So just understand that those rules are still in place and that it's part of the entire equation. I'd say that when it comes to things like that you can hold in RSPs and TFSAs as well, there are certain things that are deemed acceptable, right? That you can hold in these type of accounts. So mutual funds, ETFs, stocks, bonds, fixed income, like GICs, right? Even savings accounts. These are typically structures that are allowed for in things like RSPs. You can't, buy real estate in an RSP or a TFSA, right? Unless it's through an income trust, but that's another story. But for the most part, there are different types of assets, and you kind of want to group them in different classes as well in terms of their behavior. So that's kind of a high level. Like in general, I think for most people that are exploring the topic, right, you want to look at the different type of asset classes, how they behave, and whether or not their behavior fits in with what you are comfortable with, right? Sometimes banks call and investors will have assessments called like risk tolerance questionnaires and that kind of stuff. And for me, I've always kind of thought, hey, I don't know if that properly captures what people look at risk as, but there is some of it is what you can stomach, right? If you're holding something like a stock, even if it's a very large company, right, that has been around for a century, right, that doesn't mean that it's going to always keep growing, right? And it also means that when things change, when interest rates go up, it may go down, right? So even if you have a long-term view on where that asset class is headed or that particular security, right, you want to understand that it's still part of the marketplace, it's still being traded, and those things are going to happen, and you have to be comfortable stomaching things that happen, right? And same thing for real estate. And I think like it's easy to forget sometimes in especially the Toronto area that that real estate, like every other market, can correct, right? And as you explore some of those decisions, right, just make sure that you're looking at all sides of the coin and understand that what all the different things and parameters that can happen, and take a educated step forward. And obviously, it's not to say the worst thing that can happen a lot of times is just being paralyzed and that being and analyzing to over analyzing things. Like, yes, that's, you don't necessarily want to go there, but at the same time, just make informed decisions that you where you understand the risk that you're taking on, and yeah, go from there.
Yeah. So what I took from that is at the, like all of our other advice, just start, like put it in something, but like you probably want to start with, I don't know, like a market ETF type of thing, like a low fee thing, just to kind of get it in there, whether it's a mutual fund and this and that. There's all sorts of different vehicles. Your bank or some sort of professional will be able to help you with those, but just get started. And then as you can invest more time and get a little bit more savvy on these things and look at some of the other ones that are a little bit more complex to get into. And that's obviously the stuff that can be held within the RSPs and the TFSAs. And then you can also, again, if you want to be a different type of investor, you can take a look at like real estate assets and actual business, like physical assets and all that sort of stuff as well. So, but just be mindful that some of them are in the hype cycles. So I point specifically to like the NFTs and the cryptos, where there's a lot of money to be made and there's a lot of money to be lost at the same time. So it's not quite there where it's kind of more mainstream. So just be buyer beware, so to speak, and know what you're getting yourself into. I know I talked to someone where if you think about investment, it's basically informed gambling, right? So you never know if a company is going to keep on going up, like you assume, right? But sometimes like long existing companies have gone under, and some of the proceeds have been as a result. But get started and then spend some time to figure out what sort of investor that you want to be, and then kind of move and research accordingly.
Yeah. And one thing that Luki, you touched on just now that I think is just so important, just the idea of diversifying, right? Splitting up and ETFs, things like that, mutual funds are a way to diversify, right? It's not the only way, there are other ways, but it is a way, right? And what that means is really just spreading out your risk in different securities and not having all your eggs in just one basket, right? So that's it's a good idea in the sense that you are decoupling some of that risk and making sure that you're not putting your entire life savings into something that may not pan out the way you planned it. So,
yeah, and what that means is instead of betting on, let's say, a certain company, then you can bet on like an industry or even the entire market as a whole, right? So those are something that can definitely hedge your risks, and then that diversification can definitely help. And it could be also diversification outside of just kind of those investment vehicles, aka like the real estates, the businesses, and all that sort of stuff, right? Because those are other things that you could consider as well. And the last thing that I want to leave folks on is just be wary of advice from friends and family, because uncle so-and-so and auntie so-and-so will have this hot tip from whatever and this and that. And before you pour all of your money because they think it's good and they did the same thing, just be mindful, right? Because sometimes if they are very savvy finance professionals and they understand the market, then you want to take that into consideration versus they just heard it from a friend of a friend of a friend who works here or whatever. You always have to be careful of those types of things. And any thoughts on things to think about when you get advice from someone like a friend or family?
Yeah, and that's such a great point. And I'd say like what worked for them, right, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for you, right? That's number one, right? And that's a rule. That's something that can be applied in so many different places, but especially when it comes to finances, right? It's an ever-changing landscape. Things are, 20 years ago, you could buy any pre-construction condo, and that was you'd double your money in 2 years, like that kind of thing, right? That's not necessarily the landscape today, right? Not to say that those are bad investments, but it's a little bit different. Materials have gone up a lot, right? There are a lot more supply in the marketplace, and that equation has shifted, right? So it's just understanding that taking it with a grain of salt, understanding that yes, maybe their advice worked well for them, but understand that there could be further things to look into, and they might have blind spots in their perspective as well that you want to make sure that you're capturing and in order to make the most informed decision for you. So yeah,
for sure. So I think that that's a good starter conversation for those young professionals just getting in the workplace, starting to get their first few paychecks, and how to get them on a good path to financial security, independence, and freedom later on. So if we were to sum it up, it's to make sure that from your salary and your benefits, you're actually capitalizing on everything that's coming in, so that the money coming in is as high as it can be, and then create that spending plan so that the money coming in is more than the money coming out, right? And take a look at essentials versus non-essentials and emergency stuff, because stuff happens in life. So you got to make sure that you're safe. And then when we talk about things like savings and investments, so it's really up to you from a personal situation for the RSPs and TFSAs. But generally speaking, you probably want to start with the TFSAs, RSPs when you're making a little bit more money. And then if you want to go be on fire and retire early, then you might need to make a few sacrifices, but then you'll have more rewards later on. And then you can look to diversify your investments in different areas. So probably start with whatever you can get your hands on. And then as you get a little bit more savvy, you want to make sure that the investments are fully diversified, and just be wary of the stock tip from uncle so-and-so or cousin this and that, right? So hopefully that was a good starter conversation. Any other last minute remarks that you want to share?
Yeah, no, and just I'd say have fun in this journey. It's definitely part of adulting, right? Taking care of your own finances, and it's an exciting journey. Give yourself a bit of grace and know that mistakes will be made, and that's okay, right? But with each experience, learn, grow from it, and make better decisions. And that's what this journey is all about. And excited for your story and how things will go. And yeah.
Perfect. So thanks, Paulson, for sharing your SIWIKE and insights, and hopefully we'll have you back for a future episode.
Yeah, look forward to it. Thanks so much, Luki.
Thanks for joining us on the SIWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you found this podcast. And if you can give us a review, that would be very appreciated. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn at Luki Danu, LUKIDANU, and the same on most social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.